welcome to our panel. It has a very ambitious title about truth, trust, hope, lots of existential words in there. My name is Dimitra Letsa. I come here today from Sweden. I work for Google and News Partnerships, but I have 20 years of journalism on my back. I would say my main expertise in this panel is that I am an inhabitant of this planet, and I'll try to ask questions that would be related to all of us. With us today is Wojciech Oleksiak, and Charles Terroille. Extra points for saying the names correctly. And they will guide us through their work and investigation about misinformation and delay tactics and how this influences the coverage of climate crisis. We'll start with Wojciech, then Charles, and then we can have a long discussion with your questions and mine if needed to deep dive in this very interesting topic. Thank you very much.
Hello, everyone. Really honored to be here. I'm wearing two hats today. So one hat is I'm one of the members behind. Oh, can we just? Oh, cool. Thank you. So one hat is I'm a member of the Europeans podcast, which is a podcast that brings you hopefully non-boring news from across Europe every week. I very much relate to the sort of satire comedy, the angle of covering news. And then this year we were very lucky to join a cross-border international investigation with Lighthouse Reports. That is a household name. I don't think I have to introduce them to you. I think I won't give you a lot of great hints because I guess you're all better journalists than I am. But I think I might share with you how something started from a very, very tiny piece of information that one of our reporters found and how it spiraled into a big investigation that covered farmers' protests across Europe. So let's go. So one day, the lead expert on food systems at Lighthouse Reports, Tin Lei Win, she visited the site of Copa Cogeca. This is an organization that is a hub of all the national unions of farmers across Europe. So if there is a union, like a national Danish union for farmers, they are probably members of Copa Cogeca. And Copa Cogeca, being the biggest lobby group in Brussels, claimed on their website that they represent 22 million farmers in Europe. Thing was like 22 million. Like she knew that there's about 9 million farms in Europe, so that would say that they represent all the farmers in Europe. And that was a bit weird. So that's how Copa Cogeca investigation number 1 was launched. A thing with a group of reporters from across Europe, they determined that actually a lot of the farmers do not feel represented by Copa Cogeca. They are not members of any union, and that this claim was completely bonkers and had nothing to do with the reality. So guess what? They updated their website. Now it says 10 million farmers. I still think it's pretty bold, but again, like it's way better. Like it's at least 2 times better than the previous claim. So great. So that was investigation number 1, and then the protests started rolling across Europe, the ones you've seen on the television and everywhere else. That was late autumn 2023. So Thin and her team, they already knew that there is some problem with representation of farmers, right? That there are people who claim to represent farmers, whereas they represent only a very selected specific group of farmers, which in this case are farmers who have, big lands, they run huge operations. So these protests started in a very grassrooted way. We had, protests in southern France, in Poland, especially eastern Poland. And then something started becoming really weird pretty fast. And this is the time when I joined the investigation, because I noticed that in my country, this guy started showing up a lot. It was really interesting because the protests in Poland, like in a nutshell, they started because there was this problem with imports of Ukrainian grain into Poland. This guy has nothing to do with grain. He's basically the biggest mink fur farmer in producer in Poland and I think in Europe probably, and he's been fighting the looming ban on mink fur production in Poland for many years. And basically, whenever you open any sort of Polish media outlet and wanted to get to know what's going on with farmers' protests, you had this guy show up. I was like, this is really weird. The same thing happened in France. So it started in the south with Jérôme Bail, who was protesting against livestock prices that dropped drastically. And you have FNSA join in and actually overtake the protests, even though they are mostly union for grain farmers, and they were suddenly demanding that to stop the idea that was a part of the Green Deal to reduce the use of pesticides. So there was something very, very clearly going on that was wrong, and there was somebody trying to co-opt this actual very or like sort of genuine and grassrooted protests of farmers who were really struggling. So I guess that had to be super, super annoying for farmers who were fighting to make ends meet. And then you've got these massive organizations coming in, stepping in for you, even though you didn't ask, and trying to, get some completely unrelated business done, as, mink farming against a drop in prices of corn, for example. So then we started investigating who are these people trying to co-opt these voices. And we did a lot of interviews. We went out in the field, talked to many farmers, to small associations of farmers. And it turned out that it's pretty much the same story in every country. There is one or two dominant unions that basically hold a lot of power and that are super close to the government. And just let me do this. And in every country, we heard the same story. There are guys in their 60s, 70s. They've been basically going hand in hand with any government, whether that was a left-wing government, right-wing government. They are very close. They get stuff done. Who are they representing? They are representing themselves. They don't really care about all the farmers because they usually have massive, massive farms. And this is how we started investigating in who these people actually are. We used a lot of people worked on this. We used a lot of OSINT research. We did a lot of interviews. We checked pretty much every registry that is openly available to the public. And we discovered that actually people who make to the top of national unions are usually people who run operations at least 50 times bigger than an average farm. And the problem is that they have the time to make a career in unions in farming. People who work the land, they have no time to go to like 15 meetings every year to establish themselves as important people, activists. I mean, not activists, but like people who are who basically politicians in the world of agriculture. So already that excluded 95% of farmers, because 95% of farms in Europe are small farms run by one family where they have maybe one or two employees. So they have no time to get involved and try to make have a side hustle of trying to become an influential politician. And then, especially in context of France and Italy, our reporters uncovered pretty shocking facts where these sort of agricultural magnates they are involved in massive conflicts of interest, namely some of them. Let's take the example of Coldiretti, so the biggest farming union in Italy. Some people there are on the board of Coldiretti, so they are, in theory, they are supposed to represent all farmers and care about all the farmers. And then they happen to be shareholders of the biggest agricultural company in Italy. So it's as if like the bigger employer was also like the leading member of the workers' union. It just makes no sense whatsoever, and this obviously then ends up by them trying to pass and successfully passing legislation that is favorable for big producers of food. They are almost always the highest earners, and they benefit from the economy of scale, which again is just going contrarily in the direction different to what a regular farmer might want from them. And yeah, the links with big companies are pretty obvious. Then the biggest problem that brings us back to the problem of discourses of delay and misinformation is this. I think it's not a very this thing is pretty recent as far as we managed to understand. They are really interested in media. A lot of them either control some media outlets directly, or they are shareholders. And I would like to go back to this example of the guy that I call the ominous Ming guy, so the one who produces fur. It's pretty incredible when I just went into the rabbit hole of what kind of media he owns. This guy went as far in his efforts as to create a whole ecosystem of media outlets, fake media outlets. So, like, you go to a certain landing page, it looks as a media outlet, but then when you see who's writing the articles, there is no like names. If there are any people talking about something, these are very often his employees. Then on these very websites, there are expertise from experts who, if you Google properly and like you check who they are also employees of his company or related to his companies. He runs NGOs and institutes that also back up his claims about, how do we need fur for all, how, like, mink fur production is instrumental for employment in Poland. Like, it's not. But, there's this whole ecosystem of lies, like complete, just fake news and fake facts, which are being, constantly, like, there's like this, this feedback loop where they're being reinforced by experts, and a lot of also scientists who probably he pays, who are like, were really, their scientific resume wasn't that good, but they were backing up his claims. So then for someone who's exposed to this sort of information, it's really, really hard to, like, get out of this loop, because everything you try to check, there are links. So you click on a link. Oh, the link says exactly the same thing that this one guy said. And then you go, somewhere else. And it, again, like, the same information is being repeated many, many times. And then this specific guy, he has a lot of estate in far right media and with like very strongly Catholic media in Poland. So even they are like backing up his claims. And then it becomes, a reality of its own. It's really hard for people who are exposed to this to discern what's fact, what's not. And interesting thing is that I went to many farmers' protests, but one of them was organized by the biggest union, so not related to this guy. And they are also, like, basically what they say is mostly through right-wing media. And I went there. It was late in the investigation. It was May, and it was a protest against the Green Deal. So I went from Mike and I was trying to, like, ask people, what don't you like about the Green Deal? Why are you protesting? And the first thing, great, thank you. First thing I realized, there were hardly any farmers there. I mean, maybe one of 7 people were actual farmers. Then second thing, they had no idea what the Green Deal really was, except for saying, Green Deal is going to kill Polish agriculture. Green Deal is going to, like, make our children eat food that is full of antibiotics. Like, really, there was no knowledge of the Green Deal. Whereas where I visited individual farmers in Poland, they had very specific, remarks. I don't like this. I like this. No, this is going to be hard. They didn't like very, very specific things. And then this massive protest of 50,000 people, maybe had like 2 informed discussions about why Green Deal should be changed or not introduced. This was pretty massive. So, this whole misinformation situation creates a reality where you can actually, put foots on the ground, people very convinced, shouting very loudly and doing things that actually benefit your cause. And that cause is something that every big business is afraid of. Every big business is afraid of change. They don't like change. For a small farm to make a change where there's a new regulation, the worst thing that can happen is that maybe you have to buy a new machine, or you have to change things slightly. Maybe you have to train some, like, 1 or 2 people. For big business, if we introduced, like, the reduction of pesticides use, is like a massive operation. They have to restructure. It costs millions and millions of euros. So they do everything they can to drive the discourses of delay and make this whole thing stop. The problem is, and that's what I'm leading up to with this very rushed presentation, because I'm trying to summarize something that was happening for 7 months. is that at the end of the day, at the highest echelons of power, actually only those most influential, rich, and affluent farmers get in the room of and sit at the negotiation table. And this was the case with this year's watering down, or actual almost canceling of the Green Deal, and provisions that related to agriculture, so farm to fork strategy, where after all these protests, this spraying manure and blocking many capitals across Europe, then suddenly they are banging on Ursula von der Leyen's door. They get listened to, and there are a few meetings between November and June. There are several meetings between Ursula von der Leyen, and the way that was presented is that with her and farmers. And so we were like, we checked her schedule, like, what are these farmers that she talked to? There were only the biggest organizations, national or pan-European, mostly related or direct or members or linked with Copa Cogeca. So we wrote her an email, like a FOIA request, like, dear Mrs. von der Leyen, we hope you talked to some, environmental activists and like small farm associations. We're sure, that these positions were also taken into account. And we got a very nice answer very quickly from her spokesperson. So it was hard to imagine, but actually between October 2023 and until the moment that the Green Deal was watered down almost immediately, she did not even consult any of the organizations outside of these big farming lobbies, which is a bit of a sad ending of the story. But that's what happened. The Green Deal is gone. A lot of the progressive, most of the progressive provisions will not happen, probably not now, at least. And the result is that the voice of many farmers are lost. And we tend to think of farmers as a sort of monolithic group, or like a group that has very similar interests. It's completely not that. They have very diverse interests, and we really need to hear from all of them, because all of them are very important. And if you want to think about biodiversity, that, for example, small farmers are interested in, because they are on the front lines of climate change. For somebody who runs a 700-hectare monoculture corn field, he does not care about the land, because he's going to move somewhere else. He's going to buy another land somewhere, maybe in Ukraine now, because that's a cheap land. But for someone who's been staying in this one place for 100 years with his family, he's going to really care. They're going to really care about biodiversity and introducing all these things that, for example, Green Deal, that was very far from being perfect, was trying to introduce. So yes, the whole investigation is available here. It was called Farmers Protests Who Gain. I encourage you to go and have a look and listen, because it's also a podcast. And yeah, thank you so much for your attention. Sorry for speaking so quickly.
Hello, everyone. So thank you for being here. I want to talk about the farmers' protest too, but I want to talk about it in the social media aspect of the protests. And you might know, because we're in Europe right now, that the farmers' protests were huge. But for those of you who don't know, there were about 4,000 gatherings of farmers during the first 4 months of the farmers' protest, according to some estimates. And at the same time, in the whole world, there were 6,000. So 4,000 of 6,000 protests related to agriculture happened in Europe beginning of this year. So it was really big. And when something big happens like that, media obviously cover it. Yet, when you try to look at the coverage of the farmers' protest, it's often really headlines like, the farmers are revolting against net zero. Farmers are revolting against climate action. But do they actually? If you look at the demands of the farmers all across Europe, which is what Carbon Brief has done, so it's a publication in the UK, and they analyzed what all the farmers were asking in like documents, claims, and so on in each country in Europe. And they found that if you list it, 50% of the demands are related to climate and biodiversity broadly. The rest, it's taxes, imports, exports, the power of retailers, and many things related to the economy, the machines, the costs, and so on. And within the farmers that demand things about climate change, they're not all against climate change. Some are asking, like in Greece, well, we have intense heat waves. So can we have a bit more money to adapt? But obviously, other farmers are also worried about the costs and what can we do with climate change if it's already too expensive. So it's a bit more nuanced than what we saw in the media. And this prompted me and two journalists from Spain, from a publication called Neutral, to investigate what were the discourses about climate change during the farmers' protest. So we looked online, blogs and social media. And we searched two things. The first was, what was the misinformation? Was there disinformation as well? And was it linked to the farmers' protest? And yes, indeed, we found many instances. By having access to all the fact checks that were published across Europe, there were 130 instances of mis and disinformation that used the farmers' protest as a way to say things like, in Spain, there was a big water scarcity problem, and what disinformation spreaders were saying was that the government had destroyed its own water infrastructure in order to activate eco-friendly policies, because it's all a conspiracy. Or things like chemtrails. And I'm sure this audience knows very well about climate misinformation. But the second thing we wanted to look at is whether these claims ended up in the top conversation. And this is what we're going to look at today. We're going to dive into the top conversation. And this, I mean by this, that if you take a social network, most of the posts don't get reach. They can trend for a day or two, a week, and that's great. But then if you look at a long period, very few posts, a small minority of posts gets a lot of attention, reaches a lot of people. And that's what we're going to look at. So, this is what we found. We expected misinformation, disinformation to appear in the top conversation. But what we found actually, oh, these are an old version of the slides. Okay, I'll do it without it then. So what we found were that in the top conversation on Facebook, what I mean by that is that if you take all the posts on Facebook, you sort them by popularity, so likes, retweets, or whatever. Then you take the 100 most popular posts that talk about the farmers' protest, and you repeat that for 6 countries. And this is what we did. So we looked at Germany, we looked at France, we looked at Italy, Poland, the Netherlands, and I think that's it. And what we found were not classic misinformation. People were talking about climate policy on Facebook, and they were in the top conversation. I don't know if any of you has ever trended talking about climate policy on Facebook. This has never happened to me. And what was really striking is that, so just to mention a few things about the slide here, I apologize, it's not the updated version. We have an average of 13% of the top conversation featuring discourses of delay. So this is not 13% a low number. This is 13% of the things that everyone sees. Everyone is touched by these messages because they have the most reach. And so 13% of that is quite significant. But when we look to the detail, what we see is that there are several narratives. So again, sorry for the slides. We looked for 3 things. So in dark red, you have narratives that are against the EU's climate action, specifically the EU. In lighter red, you have just general narratives, critiques of climate action, saying we shouldn't do it. And then in purple, it's usually this climate misinformation that we see. It's the conspiracy narratives and so on. And what we saw, and it's really striking, if you start here, this is just general anti-climate action posts. And these are interactions. So it shows how popular the narratives were. And at the beginning, we see people just posting discourses of delay related to climate change, climate action. But as we move on into the farmers' protest, suddenly this big dark red bar here appears. And in 2 weeks, the whole conversation switches from just general discourses of delay to focusing on the EU. And this is even more striking than people posting on Facebook about climate policy. Now they're talking about EU climate policy. So again, I don't know if any one of you has ever trended on Facebook with European climate policy, and that's not my case. And here you can see the total of interactions. And again, you see that a big majority of the narratives of delay during the farmers' protest were really about European policy. Then, after doing this analysis, we tried to look at who offered these posts. Because when we looked at narratives, we were looking at text, just text, because you don't want to be influenced when you're categorizing posts by who wrote the post. So this is hidden. But in the end, we're like, man, they're speaking about EU climate policy in the top 100 Facebook posts. Who does that? And then we click on the profiles, we de-anonymize the data, and we end up seeing these logos. These are like the images I saw the most. And I started doing another extra analysis looking at who posted the discourses of delay. And it happens that far-right politicians, not just any far-right politician, but endorsed far-right politicians. So not fan accounts, not commentary accounts, officially endorsed politicians were really a majority of the authors of discourses of delay, and they focused mostly on EU climate policy. Now, what this means, you might think, is that it's inevitable. Social media is used, people like things, we can't do anything about it. Maybe fact check, but what else? Well, the issue here is divided in 3 things that I want to share with you. And the first is the impact. And we had a glimpse through the impact with the previous presentation. This headline from the Sunday Telegraph that I was talking about earlier, farmers are revolting against net zero. This was kind of the whole main framing point for the farmers' protest. Not all media did that, but many media just took on and kept repeating that thing that was also present on social media. So you had this feeling of reality. Everyone is saying the same thing, so it's true. And this is the first issue. But then the thing is, social media is not just made of people. It's not people liking each other, interacting. It's also a platform, an algorithm. And the thing is, the medium is the message. If you have social media that runs algorithms pushing for divisive content and more emotional reactions and controversy, then the reach is going to go to the people having such narratives. And the question that comes with that is, can we have a healthy conversation about European climate policy on Facebook? Because the posts I saw were not really a healthy conversation. And the big thing I want to take out from this is that we had a great opportunity for a conversation. Farming is one of the biggest issues if you look at climate change in terms of mitigation and adaptation. And farmers are also going through hard times in terms of cost, living wages, and so on. And we had thousands and thousands of farmers asking for a debate. And what did they get? A revolt against net zero. That's it. And the climate community in mitigation and adaptation, they keep saying, the scientists, and you can find that in the IPCC too, that if you want to have a success in doing any kind of climate policy, you have to take care of the policy impacts. Sorry. So what does it mean? It means that if you were doing a policy, you have to take care of what's going to happen to people after the policy is enacted. And IPCC reports consistently say the best action is the action that takes care of justice, fairness, and equity, just like we heard with the UNCHR presentation this morning. And here we had everyone ready for a debate. Climate side, farming side, both sides were ready to debate. But the only things we talked about were really like, is the European Union gonna kill us all with less agriculture, less farmers, and other discourses of delay? So a quick thing, sorry. Oh yeah, definitely some stuff missing, sorry. A quick thing I want to say again is that this report, which you can see here in really small, was done thanks to the data shared by the EFCSN in the Climate Facts program. You can find it online. It's called the Fertile Ground for Disinformation. And the data we had to study social media, it came from an app called CrowdTangle. And today, this app is dead. So I don't know how we can do it in this environment, but it's getting harder and harder to have access to data to do research on social media. So thank you.
Thank you very much for this inspiring discussion. I will start by maybe a bit on your last point and bringing in the trust. We are talking about maybe two different issues about misrepresentation, farmers losing a seat on the table, and their voice getting swum in disinformation. And you mentioned that it's more and more difficult to do that type of research to get the data and have an impact both to policymakers, the society, and maybe to fellow journalists who have to dig a bit deeper and embrace more of the investigation's point of view. I will start with you and ask, what are your thoughts about it, and how you think it could become easier, or any advice or any voice for help around this?
I don't think I know the answer. Just the only thing I want to share that was very important for me. I got the sense that most of you work for big established media outlets. That's not my experience. I work for a tiny outlet, and for us to join forces with a wide group of reporters that were already working under a big organization really helped, because we could exchange expertise. We could exchange on the ground reporting, which is very expensive. And also, like, everybody brought something else to the table, which was super important. And I think that was, when we did the evaluation of the project, that was pretty much positive. It was that really the group was very complementary, and that really helped us, because for us that would be never ever impossible to even think of an investigation like that. So I guess collaboration is the key. I know that a lot of people think that it's because a lot of the grants, they require you to collaborate, and some people think of it as a burden. I've been in situations where it was a burden, but I think that basically we should be open to this and try, because a lot of the things that we can attain would be never attainable if we tried to do them single-handedly.
I agree. I did this work in partnership with two journalists from Spain, and just having a second look and a second experience from another country about the really local impacts of climate change and how these are used through misinformation and disinformation, it really enlightens the working sessions and the things you're going to write, because today in Europe, although we have really consistent themes that touch everyone and issues that are really systemic, we all get our little national perspectives and our national actors, and sometimes when you don't collaborate this way, it's hard to see that it's really systemic and that together you can have much bigger impact on these projects.
Let's open up for questions. A mic back there. I think someone is bringing you a mic.
Hello. Thank you for the presentations. I have a question for Charles. You said the app you used to get the data is dead, but do we have like a historical data set that we can play with, filtered data, interactions, and so forth?
Well, there are some data sets, but these are created by people such as researchers in universities that study, for instance, Twitter. I know there are a lot of databases around the world who have a history of the posts and the likes and the connections and etc. Yet these are not open platforms. And today we face very big issues regarding data access. Actually, European regulation is now going into that, but it's still not enough. Facebook had built CrowdTangle so that researchers could check for all types of content that are harmful. So it goes from the misinformation to like children porn and children images and things like that, which are really serious as well. So the access was cut off in August, and it's happening all over social media. Twitter has made its access for researchers to the data almost impossible if you don't have tens of thousands of dollars to spend a month, which is not the case of researchers and independent journalists. And it's very similar all across the platforms. So there is something big happening here because, as you saw, the conversations happen there and they spill everywhere. And they make people believe that these content have so much reach because it's what everyone thinks. Yet in reality, it's not necessarily that. And without access to data and researchers looking at it, we will never be able to properly understand what comes from real problems with real voices and what comes from interested people with covert interests and tactics that we should study.
Sorry, but so there is open access to the data until they were cut off?
So yeah, we had a way to search, basically just look at what was happening on Facebook publicly, not anything private. And now this access is cut and we don't have any option to get the historic data unless you contact people who do have it on hard drives and computers.
Hi, mine is just a quick comment to follow on for information purposes. So the specific act that covers this is the EU Digital Service Act. And the problem which you have surfaced on that applies to the act is that act specifically now allows researchers, even in non-academic institutions, to have access to social media. It forces them to bring out that data. But the problem is that any researcher, academic or not, has to be vetted by a national public authority. And then you now see the layer of censorship that can occur there. So I think when we're talking about these things, we should also add the fact that there will still be some legislation that also prevents future access as well. Just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, fantastic. And I would even add that even if you get accepted through all the steps that you have to go through, now the feedback we're getting is that it doesn't necessarily happen. You don't necessarily get the access. So enforcement is also a question here and it's getting its way.
Any more questions? No, I can ask one more then. one of my favorite phrases is that it's not about climate change, it's not about the planet. The planet is fine without us and will survive without us. It's our existence as the here in jeopardy. And that should have been enough to unite us all above all the interests that everybody else has. And how do you think research, journalism can help unite all those voices and give more bandwidth to the right voices so that we reach the right result?
Okay. So it's a big question, but what I could say is that what could help us to give good stories, something universal, something that shows it's a problem for everyone, is to look at history. There were times where we had similar problems, not climate change, unless tens of thousands of years ago, but I mean, in the history of, for instance, misinformation and farmers, etc. 3 years ago or something like that, in the Netherlands, there was the nitrogen policy. And if you look at reports about this, it's the same problem. It's hundreds of thousands of posts on social media saying something that doesn't correspond to much of the majority of what people are saying, and the influence, a transnational far right getting involved, etc. And this was just a couple years ago, and we didn't make any link between that, what's happening now, and what's going to happen tomorrow. And I think if we connect all the dots, realize that we're all living through similar situations, similar problems, and maybe we can find similar ways to tackle them, and not forget what's happening, basically.
Yeah, obviously, I think everyone dreams of changing something very tangibly and overnight. Everyone who dreamt of a career in journalism one day, but I do believe in applying constant pressure. And the thing that I really liked about the investigation I was a part of is that it really started from something that you could call waste of time. Like, why would you just pick on one number on one side? But actually, that was the start. No one ever before that, before Thin started doing this, no one was really going hard on Copa Cogeca. They were working behind the lines, really doing some hardcore lobbying in favor of those big producers of food and livestock. And now I think, they know that there is a group of journalists, a very good one, Lighthouse Reports, looking at their hands all the time. And I've had that experience a lot in my country, Poland, where, a lot of different weird stuff is going on all the time, that if you just approach a politician and tell them, hey, I'm investigating what you've been doing this time, they become much more aware, much more careful, and they won't go crazy that easily. And I wish I could, I've got a son that's 8 years old, and he'll very often ask me, like, Dad, what did you do today? Like, how your work is helping us? I'm like, well, like, maybe I didn't change the world today, but I'm trying. And I think it's just really important, like, to collaborate, to just, chip in with what you have. Somebody brings a bit of humor, somebody brings, brilliant research using tools I have never heard of. I'm sorry they're gone, because I would start using them tomorrow. But I think just it's nice we can convene and have a meal together and talk, because that's something. This is a hard work. I think everybody can relate to that, and I just think that this constant pressure is something really, really important. And the more politicians and decision makers we reach out to by personally and let them know I'm watching you, I think the better it is for us, because the planet's gonna be at its best when we're gone.
I agree with that. What are you investigating now? What's the next project?
Yeah, so I kind of stayed within this thing. I'm oh, what can I say? I cannot say much. I'm investigating.
No secrets then.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I stayed with industrial meat production. There is a very outrageous thing going on the borders of Poland and Ukraine, and I'm trying to like understand why is that even possible. So that's what I've been up to recently.
Charles?
Yeah, sure. So it's not really about climate change, but it's about the same problem that we just saw with the farmers' protests. It's about the platforms We're currently doing research, and if anyone's interested, we're launching a collaboration next week. We're checking how big platforms are actually allowing content that is sanctioned and illegal in the EU, so from Russia. And there is a lot of content that's spreading around and being illegal. This content has been reported and not many actions have been taken. So we're looking into that.
I can only say that society needs more journalists like you, and we hope we get more and more, and less people who buy into the viral things and just reproduce. So thank you very, very much for your deep presentations today, and thanks all of you for listening to us.
Thank you.